So, welcome to our third general meeting. I have a few announcements for you guys. First, the European Union crisis, the hopes and woes of politics and economics, was a great success. We had a full room, we had 4 professors. They really were happy to be here. They want to come more often to our events. We also had cookies and coffee. We're also going to have the event, we had an event filmed by BUTV, and we're going to have the whole video at our website and probably on YouTube and probably somewhere else. So the ones of you who missed the event can watch it online. We're going to have Rishi Chakraborty talk about Africa's challenge in developing micro and residence markets. This is the first time we're going to have a student give a presentation this semester. You guys, as students, student writers, or just members, can, if there's something you're really passionate about, you guys can just make a presentation. We're gonna walk it through with you. We're gonna work on it, and you guys can present it to the club. And this is the way we want to develop, arguments, debates, or different economic topics. So Africa's challenge in developing migrant remittances markets is something that we're not necessarily. It's a very how would I say, not very research topic. It's gaining traction right now. It's a very important market. It's very interesting, and it's something that most of us will miss out. I'd also like to announce that Daniel Curry, we have the major argument or major debate this semester is big government versus small government. And next meeting, next general meeting, Daniel Curry here will talk about the problems with small governments. Also, I would like to announce that Abdul Hanan, who is very close to us, closer than you think, will be our next guest speaker. He will be a guest speaker outside of Boston. So I hope you guys come and really want to give a good impression to a speaker who's not you affiliated to speak to the students. He will speak about the multilateral trading system, strengths and challenges from the developed countries' perspective. This will be a very interesting presentation, and we're even going to have the International Affairs Association work with us on that again. They'll even sponsor us. Another thing that I would like to announce is Economics Majors Expo, which is basically an expo of all the CES majors, and economics has its stands. They have asked us to have members of the undergraduate club to join the economics department and staffing the table. And basically it's a volunteering system. If you guys want to volunteer, you're going to get to meet some high-ranking professors and help other students out who have a question regarding your major. What do you guys think about your major, by the way? It's a good major, bad major? You can tell them. You don't like it, though, right? So it will be on October 18th from 12 to 3 at the GSU Metcalf Ballroom. You guys, when you can email us if you want to come, with the hours you want to come, so you don't have to be there the entire 3 hours. If you want to come from 12 to 1, you can feel free to do that. I think also Professor Claude Eitzen will be there, who is actually our faculty at Pfizer. So these are all the announcements I have for you guys. I'd like to welcome Rishi, and the podium is yours. Thank you.
Hi guys, so I'm Rishi Chakraborty, as you can see, and I'm actually a senior in BU, and I'm doing the BA MA program in economics. And well, one reason is that I'm really passionate about development economics, and the reason being that I feel that development economics really addresses some of the key pressing issues in our world today, such as poverty, public health, etc. And to be honest, how many of you have heard about remittances or know about what remittances are?
So it's basically, if I am a Bulgarian worker and I go to work in a richer country like Germany, right, and I send some money I earn back to my family in Bulgaria, so I can keep them for salary.
Yeah, that's basically what it is. So it's basically migrant workers going to another country and sending money back to their home families. So the reason I chose to discuss this topic, remittance markets, is because the economics department right now is doing a lot of research on remittances. I know Professor Lucas, he recently wrote a paper on migration and how that relates with workers sending money back home to their home countries. Also, I'm currently working with Professor Harris, and he's going to embark on this project where he's looking at remittance flows to post-conflict nations. So Sierra Leone, Somalia, Afghanistan, after the war, how do they cope? How do migrant workers go to other countries and send money back home? And remittances is actually a very important topic in terms of poverty alleviation. So there was a lot of debate with foreign aid and its advantages and disadvantages. And I mean, because there are more disadvantages than foreign aid, a lot of people have turned towards remittances as the next groundbreaking thing in terms of poverty alleviation. And so I'll talk a bit more about myself, how I got interested in this. I basically grew up in Singapore, and there's not much poverty in Singapore. But while growing up, I saw that there were a lot of workers from South Asia, from developing countries like Bangladesh, India, Sri Lanka, and a lot of them spoke my language. So I went up to them and I asked them, so what is your lifestyle like? And they're like, oh, actually it's very difficult because we leave behind our wives, our children, and we come all the way to this developed country to work just to make our living. And I asked them, so what really motivates you to do this? It's like basically my family, I earn a lot more here than I would earn back in Bangladesh or in Sri Lanka. And believe me, when I went to Bangladesh last year, I traveled a lot in rural areas, and I could see out of nowhere there were these big houses being built, big real estate projects. And I went up and asked, so who's funding all these projects? Is it the government? Is it people investing, foreigners? Like, actually, these are the migrant workers who are just sending money back to their families, and that itself is allowing them to build, to upgrade their living standards. So remittances has a big impact in the developing world. So without further ado, I'll continue. So what are remittances? Well, there are many definitions of remittances, and the IMF has a very broad definition, which includes compensation to foreign employees. What that means is that if I'm paying someone in foreign institutions such as embassies, so workers in embassies get paid, that counts as remittances according to the IMF, which is a little absurd. But the majority of remittances do constitute migrant workers sending money back home. That's basically what it is. And in short, it's a transfer of funds between individuals, between countries, across borders. So just to give you a perspective, the remittance in 2011, remittance flows to developing countries exceeded $300 billion. So this is a big source of capital for developing countries, with a 12.1% growth over the previous year. So there's a lot of scope in this in this channel. And as I said, remittances can be a very big source of income for households in developing countries. And its major role in poverty alleviation, because it enables households to not only save up, but use those savings to invest in their healthcare and education, which enables them to upgrade and improve their living standards, and even move out of the poverty trap. So it's excellent in forming human capital. And yeah. So this figure actually is very interesting because it shows that remittances in the last 2 decades have grown tremendously. And it even exceeds official development assistance, which is foreign aid. So all the arguments about foreign aid versus remittances, you can clearly see that remittances are winning at the moment. And one reason why is because foreign aid, when one country gives aid to another country or government, a lot of the amount of the foreign aid gets taken by corrupt officials, and it's not reaching the poor people. Whereas remittances it's basically funds being sent from one household to another in a developing country. So, I mean, the whole amount gets transferred, and they're receiving the entire amount, and they can invest it to improve their livelihoods. Also, you can see that compared to other forms of capital, remittances were much less volatile during the recession compared to FDI, private debt, equity flows, and ODA. So the future of remittances looks very bright, and it's a positive outlook. This is also very interesting because what this shows is that 2 regions, Sub-Saharan Africa and North Africa, are lagging behind tremendously in terms of volume as well as growth of remittances. However, the IMF forecast for the next following years predicts that most growth in remittance flows will occur in low-income countries. this clearly shows that sub-Saharan Africa is lagging behind. Because if most of the growth is occurring within developing countries, what is it that's causing them to not grow as fast? There must be some issues, right? So, I mean, what is it that's causing them to not catch up? And some of the factors, which really, one major factor actually is Africa is actually one of the most expensive remittance market in the world. So if I want to send money to Africa, that is much more expensive than me sending money to Latin America or to Asia or to Europe. And as you can see, the average is there. Sub-Saharan Africa has one of the highest costs of money transfer in the world, even above the global average, and even above many other regions like Latin America, Middle East, North Africa, Asia Pacific, and Eastern Europe. And another fact to take note of is that me sending money from the US to an African nation, that's actually much cheaper than me sending money from one African nation to another. So for instance, me sending money from South Africa to Zambia, that's actually the highest cost. It costs 25% of the entire amount for me to do this remittance transfer, which is bizarre. I mean, in fact, out of the top 5 remittance corridors, 4 of them are between African nations. And for instance, Tanzania to Uganda is very expensive. South Africa to Malawi, South Africa to Mozambique, it's almost between 12 to 25% of the entire cost. And I mean, it's really surprising as to why this is. So why don't we look at what's leading to these high costs? Number one, very low competition in the African continent. If you look at the whole continent, large money transfer organizations like Western Union and MoneyGram, they dominate 90% of the market. So there's very little room for new entrants to come in and start providing remittances. Also, post offices and microfinance institutions are providers which can potentially expand the market. But in many cases, they lack training and the infrastructure to even do so. Algeria is an exception, though, because in Algeria, the post office are well trained to provide money transfers to various households. This market is very highly regulated. So, for instance, there are a lot of contracts which a new entrant has to sign with Western Union and MoneyGram and the big players, basically. And these contracts not only are there to make you gain access to the market, but it also compels you to share your profits with these big players. And that itself is a big disincentive for new providers to enter the market. Also, many countries in Africa have regulations where they prevent anyone apart from large banks and money transfer organizations from providing remittances. In fact, only Congo, Ghana, and Kenya are the only countries that allow microfinance institutions or post offices to really expand the scope of providing money to different parts of rural Africa. Rural coverage. In rural areas in Africa, there's hardly any presence. Only 64% of branches serve 83% of the population. And from what I know, there are more payout locations for remittances and money transfers in Mexico than the entire African continent. So that itself tells you that the coverage really needs to be improved. Also, it's really difficult for the recipients of these money transfers because there are hardly any branches, so they have to travel long distances to go and get the money from their family members who send money from the US or the UK. And this really increases their own travel costs, which is a big burden for them. And finally, remittances are not much use if you don't have any banks to save the money or to earn interest or to invest in your own living standards. So you need banks, you need financial institutions, microfinance organizations to really be involved, which is not really happening in Africa. And as a result, I mean, just having the money, you're not able to invest in any form that upgrades your living standards. So as again, this chart shows that big Western Union and MoneyGram providers that are affiliated with these two organizations dominate about 65% of the market. And these large organizations dominate about 90% of the entire market share, with post offices and other providers having very little, playing a very minor role. So some areas in which we can improve this market. Obviously, we need a lot of research and that's something that has not been done in the past. There's not been that much research in remittance markets, particularly in Africa. So that's something a lot of universities, a lot of econ departments are looking at. In fact, our own university is collaborating with the World Bank and BU Law to get more research going on remittance markets across the world. We need more incentives to increase competition in order to lower the costs, because this is the main problem. I know Nigeria has completely banned all these exclusive contracts. You don't need to sign exclusive contracts to enter the market, because that distorts the entire market in the first place. Also, microfinance organizations can play a big role in really, providing credit, and they target the poorest of the poor, so they can really expand the rural coverage and make this a success story. And of course, we need to improve the efficiency of the market. So we need to provide training and the infrastructure for other players so they can actually participate in providing money transfers. This includes post offices. But also something that's really shaking this market is technology. And in many developing countries like India, but also in Kenya. Kenya is the major success story in Africa. There's this program called M-Pesa, which allows you to directly transfer money from my phone to any of your phones. So that is very easy, hardly any time required, cost effective, and the money's not getting distorted. Whereas previously, in many of these countries, they relied on bus drivers to go to each village and transport the money to households. And in many cases, they would have been robbed, mugged, or there's no security about what would happen to your money. So technology is really transforming this industry. And currently, it's only occurring at a local level in Kenya. But people are looking to expand this to an international level, so that at one point, you can send money from the US to Kenya, from the US to Zambia, or from the UK to the Caribbean. And finally, what's most important is financial inclusion, and for that, financial literacy. And again, microfinance organizations can do a brilliant job in this. And when the poor really know about what financial services are available to them, they can really play a part in the remittance markets, and it'll benefit them more. So, yeah, that's all I have for now. Any questions? Yep.
You mentioned there are no financial institutions playing in the business field. My question is, why are there no financial institutions? If the market is big and there is a demand, why hasn't anyone entered? Because this is a profitable activity.
In many cases, there are financial institutions, but not so much in the rural areas Africa is not like South Asia. In South Asia and rural areas, there's a very large population. So no matter where you penetrate, you will gain access to customers. Africa is not that case. The population is much lower. And the lack of financial institutions in rural Africa, the reason being is that in many cases it's possibly not profitable, but also because the regulations don't allow them to do so. So, for instance, regulations in many of these countries are very much favoring these large money transfer organizations like Western Union, who choose to locate in urban areas because of population concentrated there. But many banks, as you saw, banks only have 2% of market share. And in many cases, regulation bans them or restricts them from actually going out and increasing their services. So that's something that really needs to be looked at. However, Congo, Ghana, and Kenya, they're really taking the next step. They're cutting down on regulation, allowing more and more microfinance organizations to go out and reach out to the poor. And yes, in many cases, it might not be profitable, but you have to look at who does it. So microfinance organizations, they target the poor. The poor are their customers. So they have the biggest scope in this market. Yeah.
For most of these remittances coming back home to these migrant workers' countries, what's like the composition of the usage for the funds? Is it well invested in human capital and health and education and stuff like that, or are we seeing a wide use of it in like stuff that isn't really paying off in the long run?
It really depends on not only on the country, but on the income levels of the recipients. So in many cases, for the poorest of the poor, if it's a subsistence farmer, the money he gets, all he can think of is to survive, basically. So there's not much investment in healthcare or education. But in the case where, in countries where there are microfinance institutions and other financial services, or sort of a structure that provides guidance, that really tells them that no, it's important to save up and invest in your child's education, your child's health, so they can go to school, gain the skills to get a job that will lift you out of poverty. So yeah, in many cases it's just being subsistence, but that's the thing. That's a major scope for this market. If it's further developed, remittance can become a very powerful tool to poverty alleviation.
Reading a paper on Galyan and Shirgowski, and who spoke about private property rights improving the poorer people in, I think it was Argentina, that it will improve their lifestyle, and even Hayek, who spoke about a different law system, common law as we have it here, that has improved the country tremendously. Is there, as you may know most probably, is there any research on how maybe the law system in the end is basically one of the main problems for any remittance market? So, as you saw, Zimbabwe didn't get its high cost. Is it particularly the law system that has not been changed to the appropriate standards?
You mean in terms of regulation or in terms of law enforcement?
Yeah, just law in general, because as we've seen, common law and civil law in these countries that have established them properly, England, the US, have usually thrived on a good law system that punishes, corruption and so on and so forth. Is there any research coming in on that looks at the law system and helping remittance markets?
So in terms of the law, the biggest research that has been done is on the regulation. So the law being a very restricting factor in terms of the growth of this market. In terms of law enforcement, there might be, but I personally am not aware. But I do believe that greater law enforcement would increase the efficiency of this market, because as I said, in many countries, there's hardly any mechanism to transfer this money. They're just going from the bus drivers transporting it to different people in villages, and if they get robbed in the middle, that has a serious negative impact on the functioning of this market itself. So law enforcement in that sense would definitely improve this market, and that's something that needs to be looked at.
Also another question, but this is something that has been, I think, spoken about just in circles around friends and all that. In India, they usually speak about this brain drain that's been happening, where young people are leaving the country. They're sending money back, but it's just that these technical workers are not staying in the country and building the infrastructure there. Do you think that's a big problem, or do you find a way to optimize that, cause people go abroad and you keep some of the technical workers back in the country? What do you make of this, in other words?
Well, it really depends. A certain level of technical workers are required at home to assist with the industrialization. But it depends on what income level is going abroad. So if you've been to Dubai, or the Middle East, and even Singapore and Malaysia are very similar in this case. A lot of low-income workers particularly low-income workers, just go by themselves, just to earn money and send it back home. And they're actually the main drive force for remittances. Because if they stayed back, the jobs they would get, they would not earn much. There are not that many job opportunities. Even the earnings are much lower. So if they went out, the income they're sending back home is a big difference. And from what I can remember, I think Bangladesh actually really relies on remittances as a very big fraction of its foreign exchange. So there are countries that solely rely on this and specialize on this, on sending unskilled workers for construction jobs or other jobs abroad and send money back. It's huge.
Thank you.
There have been lots of cases of like, I guess, exploitation and like just abuse of like these migrant workers. Like, I mean, you're from Singapore, so obviously, you know, like a lot of the Filipino maids will like jump out of the HDB flats windows and like some of them are like sexually abused. Are there like new recent motions that are like going to protect these migrant workers at all?
Well, when it comes to, I know Singapore has very, very profound laws. So if there's a case of exploitation, they can report it immediately to the Ministry of Manpower, and they'll take care of it. So Singapore is not that big of an issue regarding this, but other countries like Malaysia, the Middle East have been subject to this. And although I can't talk too much about the law side of it, but I don't know, would you know, like, what's the status of in Bahrain or something like that?
I mean, there have been cases, especially there's been in Saudi, and I've read in some parts of the Middle East that, yeah, my workers sometimes from the Philippines who work for these people and all as maids and so on and so forth are treated quite badly. There are sometimes reports of such horrific things happening, but yeah, I mean, sometimes it kind of falls on deaf ears, I feel, but sometimes there is law enforcement. I feel more as time has been passing by, there has been much more law enforcement on that.
Right. There's also interesting research in the Middle East, and there was a paper by this Cambridge professor who said that he looked at how migrant workers from other parts of the Middle East were going to oil-rich countries within the Middle East, and them generating value really helped to smoothen income back home. So that's some interesting research. Yeah.
The graph you showed in the beginning showed that remittances were on a rise, but do you feel like what with the main countries that are recipients of migrant workers having their own domestic issues and being stringent on migrant laws, like immigration laws, wouldn't that cause a decline?
I'm sorry, can you repeat your question?
Just that
So
because
migrant laws would...
because immigration laws are at least becoming stricter in some of the countries that I've looked at, considering that they're having their own domestic unemployment issues,
Right.
wouldn't that cause a decrease in remittances?
Yes.
Or at least a decline?
So that's the thing. So during the financial crisis, there was actually a decrease in migration in general to the U.S. So a lot of workers decided to just stay back home because the incomes here were fluctuating. There weren't secure job opportunities. So I mean that shows the volatility. But as you see, that volatility is still very little compared to all other flows. And the fact is that that was a very short-term effect. So in the short term, yes, it is affected by the state of the economy. But as far as the long-term trend is concerned, regardless of the laws, you still see more and more workers seeking opportunity outside, especially due to globalization. And another important point is that technology, so the use of cell phones, etc., that can really cut across these laws. So if I'm able to sit in another country and send money to another person across borders, then the migrant laws don't really matter as much. So I mean, yes, that's a valid point. Yeah.
If you had to choose one factor to explain why remittances don't vary as much and don't fluctuate as much as the other two types of investment, I guess, what would it be?
I think it's that eventually, in the long term, workers in developing countries where there's hardly any growth, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, there's hardly any growth. It's not like China or India where it's actually changing. Here, there's like it's stagnant. Eventually, regardless of what the U.S. is like, or the UK is like, or these developed countries, they will find the need to grow up, and because the earnings in these countries is still a lot more. I was reading this book on Mexico, so I think people who were graduate with doctorate degrees in Mexico still earn more as painters in the U.S. So I mean that doesn't change the facts, and even though there might be some short-term trends in the economy, over the long term, over many years, there will still be that.
No, my question has to do with the variability.
You mean the volatility?
Yeah, the volatility, exactly. Volatility. Why during the recession, FDI, private debt, portfolio equity, got scared, put less money in the receiving countries, while the remittances stayed.
Why were they resilient?
Exactly.
I mean, so basically, well, during that time, even though migration was impacted, it wasn't impacted to that extent where people just stayed back home. As I said, people still needed to go back. So migration, that remittance is very dependent on migration, and that whole mechanism was still functioning. So that's one reason why it didn't decline, because the need is there. And I mean, no matter however you earn, you're going to send it back home. So it's sort of it's a necessity, more than anything else. So, I mean, FDI or ODA. I mean, if the state of the economy is not good, I can choose not to invest here. I can invest there. But if I'm already in a country and I have to send money back home,